Hi, everyone. It's Gloria Hester here. I'm with my friend Leo Peppas, and we have been having a fantastic conversation about somatics, horses, humans, yoga, all things about sensory information and about life, the bigger context of life and how we all affect each other, and our environment affects us, and just about connection. And I just thought that we should record some of this for you. And so, Leo, thank you for having this talk today. So,
It's a pleasure. I'm glad to be here. And also because we're talking now, we're just talking about things that for me, it feels really good to talk about because they seem to be neglected a lot. So one of the things that just came up was the way that the gaze, what we see, can be so informed by what we experience, not only what we've been taught or what we expect, but very much, especially things like direct experience, which I think it's so good if we can give time for that, time to experience what we're experiencing before we analyze it or judge it or think about it, just because we can learn so much from that, just experiencing what's happening,
yes,
And
yes.
what I wanted to give was just an example of how profound that can be, that to be impressed or to see things very differently. And I was living in London, and I was going to Amsterdam to do my body mind centering training. And I'd spent a month there immersed in the organs, in visceral experiencing. And then I was at Schiphol, Amsterdam airport, waiting to go back to London. And I was just wondering, I was looking around at all the people, wondering, what planet am I on? Am I going crazy? What's going on here? Because everyone looks to be moving in a very, very strange way. We were talking about this earlier, also to do with body image and body schema, the way that our stories, we can carry our stories in the body, and how horses might interpret that, or how it might confuse
Absolutely.
them.
Mhm.
So but there was one woman in the airport who looked remarkably different. And I thought, okay, I have to do a reality check with her. And I went up to her. I have to say, excuse me, I hope you don't think I'm mad. And I explained what I just said. She said, oh, wow, that's amazing. I've just been doing a dance training.
Yes.
And so I saw that, right? It was extremely obvious that she was completely different to everyone else. And I think that's remarkable because we oftentimes, we think we see very clearly, but we can be seeing the tip of the iceberg, and we can be missing the really, like, it's like that. There's an intelligence in the gaze that I'm sure horses have that we can lose as humans.
Yes.
We are so conditioned to see image, and we are so conditioned to see the story, and we don't necessarily see how it all plays together, how sometimes the story can get in the way of that basic movement intelligence,
Yes.
and how they work together. And there's a beautiful marriage, and it's very important. It's part of what it is to be human.
Yes, then that part coming back to being human, and the fact that she'd been in a dance training, she was very embodied, at least through a dancer's lens, through a dancer's perspective, right? Of a practice, and the practice you'd been doing enabled you to recognize that and see the difference in what was happening. And the
Yeah,
horses, our movements
exactly.
are very much affecting the horses all the time, without a
I,
doubt.
I I saw someone who was moving in relationship to this place in this moment. There
Mhm.
was a responsiveness, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and I think it's so important for us to experience that and that difference, because it's also talking to a very basic sense, like what makes sense and what doesn't make sense, and it helps us get a perspective then, I think, and make more informed choices, not just from a mental level, like why should I do that, but just, yeah, this makes sense and this doesn't, and yeah,
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 yeah. And a lot of times, patterns of discomfort or pain or limitation in our bodies, as well as the horses, is coming from this place of not having a well-informed motor plan, not having a good motor plan. And I wish there were, better ways of saying that. And there may be, I may discover those or find those ways of saying it. But what you're describing, you saw a well-organized motor plan, and she was.
Yeah, I had what one of my teachers, he says, it's like you have to receive good information, like moment by moment. We need to be receiving enough information so that we can respond. Yeah. It's like millions of years of evolution have made up these clever systems, like in the nervous system, and to be able to have a body schema, to have like a postural schema, something that we have a core that just happens. You don't do it. In fact, I don't think we can do it. It happens because I'm present in this place. I'm relating to the gravity, to the space around me, to everything that's going on. And I think we can complicate it a lot of the time. Sometimes the science seems so impressive and we get into the information, the details. But actually, so this guy, Hubert Godin, was who I did a lot of movement learning with. For me, he has a very poetic, and I think sometimes, like yoga is a poetic science. There's a poetic elements that can help us understand sometimes more than the literal, or it helps. And he has a fantastic definition of the core, which is that it's an expression of the way we meet the world. And that for me says much more than calling it certain muscles or even a coordination. It's like understanding, yeah, it's about presence. It's just a confirmation of presence. There's my core supporting.
Yes. When you have the core supporting, you will be more present. You will have
exactly
what is perceived as confidence, even with the horses. And, when you mentioned the woman in the airport dancing, there was a man that had a roping horse out west, and we had worked with his horse in a program that I'd held, and that horse was the horse for the 3 days. And that man told me, he said, when I rope with my horse now, it's like my horse is dancing.
Wow.
And
wow.
so it's
so fascinating you say that, because at the same time, it's like the cores are speaking to each other. The you get this in dance and tango and things where you have partner work. When it's a kind of controlling, it's different, but when two people are present, there's a communication happening on a much more immediate level. And it comes back to something we were talking about before recording for me, which is how we can work with the story, or we can work with the support, and the story often falls away. But it's like, for me, it's not that we don't necessarily have to acknowledge the story, but it's done from a place of presence. And what's guiding that process is how much presence there is.
Yes.
It's like, I think it's one of the very tricky things with any therapeutic work. We have so many tools to get into the story, but do we have the presence? I'm always it's always a question for me. What's guiding the process? What's guiding, what it is we're choosing to work with at this moment? Yeah.
Yes. Do you have a lens that you work through? I can, for those who are listening, I can give an example of what for me might be guiding that.
Great.
So that people who work outside of the field of somatics might have some understanding for that. But for me, it can vary. Sometimes it's a knowing that would occur, that I would know, okay, I don't even have to be in the same room with this person. This person just needs a certain response. And so you could work at that level. Then another level might be that would be, that would come up for me in the presence of a group with horses, for example, would be, well, what is that horse's tendency that I'm observing, that I'm noticing, that's to me the most dominant tendency that I might see, either in how the horse is organizing their body, and then work with that. So it could just depend for me. Those are just some examples. For you, is there an example you would like to give so that people?
It's interesting because I the first thing that comes up for me, I guess, is that I have maybe I can come back to give that example, but initially I have this kind of, that reminds me of where I get the clearest picture to tune into what's guiding me is in my experience of being in nature. So I learn the most about that there, and I get the most kind of, okay, now I recognize this, and this is something that makes real sense. Like there's no question that. So just basically, for example, if I take a walk, if I'm in nature and I take a walk, I feel that my presence in this relationship is what is dictating what I can deal with that is in the way. Like whatever is in the way comes up. It's like love and relationship. Whatever in the way of that will come up more or less in time, you know. But sometimes we want to love too much, and then too much comes up. So how we're guided in that process can be a very delicate thing. And I think that for me is something I come back to more and more to learn about how to honor that. And because I've studied so many things, I have so many models, I have so much knowledge, and I don't want that to be the most important thing, because you know it's
Yeah.
how to say it. I think one of the great things that I'm just imagining, you know, working with animals is a little bit like kids. They give good feedback.
They
You know,
do.
we can have good students, and it's different. They're behaving like they're kind of going along with the nice words you say, and they're saying, yes, teacher, that's great. But I think it's good to have that reality check as well, you know,
Sure.
because sometimes the models, we like models, we like all this traditions and you know,
Right.
and sometimes, yeah, I like to come back. So for me, it's coming back to nature, because
Yeah.
it's all there. I think it's all there. It's we have evolved to be in this relationship, and
Mhm.
so much of our intelligence presents itself there, you know. So just listening, watching what comes up, and understanding that the more I'm in a relationship with nature, the more present I am, and the more support I have to deal with the other stuff, you know.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I try to. It's a little bit abstract, so it's hard to find the same kind of. But it gives me, in that experience I have, this makes sense. This, and it's on many levels, like the intuition. Everything makes sense in this experience. So when I come back to working with people, I'm looking for that same confirmation, not, oh yes, I know what I'm doing, and I'm, you know, but does this really make sense on a more intuitive base, not
Mhm.
from what I know cognitively, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think the greatest part of our intelligence is that place that really can't be named. And the great minds like Einstein, he knew that, you know. So helping people to connect with that is very, very important. And yeah, I'm a big fan of that. Yeah, of that. So
Yes, yes.
very much.
I mean, I'm glad you asked me the question, because I struggle to answer, you know, how to speak, how to say that to people who don't have experience in the somatic work so much, you know, how to speak a language, how to come back to a more everyday way of speaking in that way. But I guess, you know, it's it can be so easy to take for granted that, oh yeah, it's nice. I like to be in nature. It's beautiful. It's lovely, and all of this stuff. But I think it's one of our greatest teachers, and it's so easy to underestimate the profound nature of what that actually means to us. You
Mhm.
know, it's the one place where everything that we've evolved to be can be very clear, and is kind of makes sense again. And it's, I find it that being in the city or being in the model world, we're reminded of something apart, and apart is affirmed. But it's so good to be in that place. And the same thing with animals, you know, it's like a reality check.
Yes.
How much do I really know? How present can I really be? For me, it was always then when I go on holiday and go into the forest again or somewhere, that would be the question. That was my big reality check. How important is all this stuff I really think I know after all these years? That's the test in relationship with people and nature.
Yes, it falls away. I know when you and I were talking earlier, there was something that you said that it's coming to me. I don't think this is exactly how you said it, but this is how I would know to say it. It's like we can be in nature. We know how nature affects us, but do we know how we affect nature? And so our presence in nature, how how are we affecting that? Because if you have that awareness, you'll be aware of it. You'll know. And there are so many degrees of that. So I think that's something that people could work with on their own, just as listeners. If you don't have somatic, people who work in the somatic field in your life, one of the things you could do as a practice is maybe just go for a walk in nature and start to notice how it's affecting you, and then start to think
Yeah,
about, feel, how am I affecting where I am right now? Because we
yeah,
are
that's great.
affecting where we are. And so, yeah.
Yes, I think that's a really good that's a good way. It's also learning how to modulate our relating. Because there was always in the beginning there was a cell membrane that was modulating the interaction between inside outside. Um, it's like an intelligence, and in fact they also talk about that being as also being the brain of the cell, the membrane, what is helping the relating actually happening. And you could see that we still have that, but it's kind of our membrane is the nervous system, the muscles and bones. This is the way we move around as well. That's part of what takes care of this relating. And I think something that's useful is that we can learn to allow that to, I mean, eventually to allow it just to modulate itself, because it knows what it needs to do. But sometimes we can get into habits of perception. We get kind of stuck in ways of behaving. And just a simple thing is like this awareness of inside and out, that sometimes we need to go more inside because there's too much happening outside. Sometimes we're also too much outside and we forget the inside. Just being aware of that. Um, and I think one of the easiest places is in nature, because there's, as long as that we don't feel there's something threatening around, we have a lot of play then, to see, okay, can I tune in inside? Can I stay inside as I meet the outside? And then just being more and more in that exchange.
Mhm.
And of course, there's many places we can take that. We don't have to be centered just in I. There's many different ways, but I think that it's a very good thing to see if we can be less exclusive in relating, through being in nature, through being in a very safe place,
Yes.
and then recovering a lot of that intelligence that manages the boundary, that is helping us to be in relationship. Yeah, because that can serve us in any situation. And I think we see sometimes, we adopt strategies in the body mind, like dealing with trauma, where uh, we try to control the information, and it may serve us in that moment, but how do we recover that kind of system that takes care of itself, that is managing the relating without us having to over control it? And I think nature is one of the best ways to recover, to go back, to slowly explore, to slowly open up, slowly. And for me, what you were saying earlier, to be in a reciprocal agency.
Yeah.
So, in other words, if I'm going to talk, then I need to listen to you. I need to experience nature's agency, if I'm going to be an agent in nature, if I'm going to act. You know what I'm saying? I need to be. It's like a dance, I'm not going to take over this dance. It's mutual dialogue. I think that's another very simple thing we can learn from exploring that. Am I
Yes. Yeah.
really able to listen? Because listening to nature can happen on so many levels. and in such profound, it's I think for most of it, it's a life work, returning, going back, and again listening a little bit more,
It is. I think there's so many connections that can be built for that within our ability to do that. The
Yeah,
practice of it creates new neuronal connections, and anything we do over and over, we get really good at it. So
right.
that alone, I think that would be when I used that example earlier about saying, oh, I don't need to even be in the room with this person because I knew they had a brain injury and the stimulus of an extra influence. They didn't need that. And I knew that, I was aware of that. So that's just over time, maybe that came about. I don't know why that came about, and it doesn't matter. It just did.
Yeah,
So, and if I'm one of those people, like if I know I don't know, I'll say I don't know, and I'm fine with that. Like
yeah,
that, we all need that. We can know a lot of things, and then some things, if we don't know, just say I don't know, and that's the honesty of that. And that's where, with any of this, the neuronal connections that get built in us with nature, like when you talked about the cell membrane, some of us have a more, dynamic energy it moves out forcefully, but there's very little that can really come in, so that's just one example of many.
yeah, yeah,
And finding this other person where everything comes in, and then that other part doesn't really flow either. So it's, yeah. And I don't know
yeah.
if you're listening here or not involved in this, if this is going to make sense. I feel like it will, because we're all human and
Well,
we all have a shared experience of that. So, yeah.
you know, for me, another thing that comes up when you say that is that most of us tend to have the areas where we're more or less aware of what's going on. So some people will be more aware of the energetic level. Some people are,
Yeah.
some people we embodied more or less in different aspects of our being. Some people are very much in certain elements of the nervous system, all of this kind of stuff. Um, and I think that so that also goes to how we address limitations, how we address the story, how we address all these patterns, like for example, things that are deeply ingrained in the nervous system. If the attachment is on the level of synapse, and that my experience has been, it's possible to get a lot of knowledge about the specificity of these different elements and how we somatize stress, how different people experience stress in different ways, depending on where their weak spots are and things like this. But actually, in the end, there's a lot of wisdom inherent in the system and in the relational system. And for me, it comes back something we were mentioning earlier, which is about context. It's like it's easy to get lost in content, and I'm always coming back to this basic question: where? Because where is the context question? Where am I? It's not the name of the place I'm in, but it's my embodied relationship with the place. And that speaks to every body system. It speaks to the cells. It speaks to everything in me, and it's giving me a context which is more than my story always. And for me, that's the clearest thing. It's like the simplest way to say it. The simplest. Um, if the models don't fit into that, I would question them. If they're saying something else or they're putting too much emphasis, because in that relating, we are addressing whatever issue it is from every perspective. And that's like the intuition. It's a plurality of perspectives. The intuition is great because it's not fed just by, a part of the central nervous system. It's fed from every level.
Yes.
And so for me, that's important, not to say you can't address issues on one level, and that's not
Right.
um,
Every level's valid. That's exactly
yeah,
right. They're
yeah,
just, some levels are more subtle than others. And I think that's
yeah,
why, like, for example, in the field of yoga, and you and I both know that yoga can look very, very different depending on the lineage and all of that. It's a vast science and art, if you will. But that's an example of, like, if you're working at the more, dense level, you're going to be working at the physical level. It's like, this is your quadricep. This is you're
So
working at
important.
that level. Yes. And so,
And it's also so important. It comes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is sustainability. How does whatever you do sustain? Or do you have to
yes.
keep doing the same thing because it just falls, the benefits fall away again? And
And then, yeah.
for me, that question is really important there because the way an issue is expressed differently through the body systems has an impact on that question. So, for example, okay, neuroplasticity, trying to offer different pathways. This can take time. It can take time. Some things can happen quickly, but how do we support that on other levels? Like, for example, the bones. The bones are one of the slowest. If we talk about every body system operating at a different speed,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is just a simple way to say it, but like the bones, for example, the femur, the thigh bone, the way it meets the pelvis and that architecture is only really established in the first 15 years of life. So that means set in the bones, set in the way I stand, the way the legs meet the pelvis, is my experience of coming into the world in the first 15 years of my life. That story is set in the bone. How do I deal with that? That's a huge question, because every time I stand, that story is saying, is this still relevant or not? And we have to know how to address this question, how to receive enough good information about what's actually going in the present moment to speak to that. And with the bones, it takes a long time. It's not like the nervous system, it's not like the glands or something. It's really, and I think that there's a beauty in that, because the body is reminding us that not only are there different perspectives, but there's different time scales to things, to experiencing. And when we have uh, a broader appreciation of that, it can help us address a lot of issues, it can help support, and it can help understand that there's also a richness. It's we have a tendency to reduce, to specialize, to say this means this. Again, not that that can't be effective, but in my experience, when it comes back to the question, does it sustain? The more I appreciate that, yeah, yeah.
I love that. I do on so many levels, no pun intended.
Yeah, yeah.
I love
We are rich. It's all very rich. Why make it less? I
it.
think it's good to develop that broad. It's like the systems thinking,
Mhm.
to develop that ability to hold a number of things at the same time. Maybe not have A plus B equals C immediately, so not have to have that. Just to give us, just to exercise that,
Mhm.
like a plurality of perspectives, because we are so conditioned in our society to go back my power is in my singular perspective, and this is right, and this is how it is.
Right, it's very myopic, right? And
Yeah,
yeah, rather than seeing the whole picture. And
myopic and anthropocentric, and you work with animals who don't agree necessarily with your anthropocentric view, right? They have a
yeah, and I don't want to do that with them, at all. And I think that's one thing that I enjoy about, across the species is like for example, with a horse, one of the differences can be, with the human, if I'm working somatically with the human, when the wind gets up, a human doesn't have the same kind of response to the wind that a horse does necessarily. A horse on
yeah,
a different
yeah,
level, when the wind is up, they're up. Their energy can go up as well. It's just something to be aware of and not take it for granted. And so we're always, working with what is, even like when you mentioned standing. And I think about how oftentimes people, start horses when they're so young, when their bones are not fully formed. And so then when I meet that horse and that horse is 15 or 20, well, how can we work with that horse so that that horse finds a way to be super comfortable in their body now? Because you can't change that they were started as a 2-year-old when their bones aren't fully formed until they're at least 5. You can't go back and do that, but you can help them find how to organize their movements in
exactly.
ways that feel really good for them. just like with
Exactly.
God.
And
So
that's so often the question, we all have limitations, and most of the time it's just about learning how to deal with it, how to address that, and they become less the problem then, you
mhm.
know.
And if you just take it on the energetic level to think about just how, because that's one of the things the yogis talk about is spanda and how everything moves in a spiral. So if you think about it on that level too, how do you just allow that to move so that it's no longer even like you would say a story, right? Which is a different
Yeah. Well,
layer.
well, for me, what that says comes back to is about our capacity to reality check,
Yeah.
which the base of which for me is what I was talking about earlier. It's having having enough of reference of the present moment, of being in an ongoing relating state.
Mhm.
And I think animals are very much in touch with that, and that's one of the beauties maybe of working with them, that it's calling us back to appreciate that, right? Because it's
Yes.
such a important support. Without that, we're trying to figure our problems out in our head, and it can be like a labyrinth. And and in Greek mythology, they have this the story of the labyrinth, which can be very much related to the mind. That the way that the hero finds the way out is Ariadne gives a thread. It's a woven thread, and that's the way. It's like, which is the system's way of looking at things. So there's no way out of that mind labyrinth through the mind. We need the intuition. We need something that is more than that, because it's its own trap, you know. And I think again that's maybe one of the beauties of animals, or in being just in nature, that it's asking us not to just be in that clever mind that sometimes overvalues what it knows as being, it's like how we come. For me, the last few years has really been about shifting the importance of what I understand from experience, and the information I've assimilated
Mhm.
from the trainings and the reading and the studying, and
Yeah.
just how learning, that the act of learning, to appreciate what that is, learning and growing. All the trainings I did, apart from my psychotherapy training, it was underplayed. I was what is learning about? What is that? And it must be great working with animals where you watch that process happen, also in very different ways, I guess.
Real time, yes. So you
Yeah,
could, yeah, absolutely. And learning is movement. That's how we learn when we come into the world. Even when you and
right.
I were talking about developmental patterning,
Yes,
that's
yeah,
happening through the experience of things like pressure or movement. It's all informing us in every moment. And that ideally never changes, but we stop, receiving
right.
the input. And there's many things that can cause us to stop.
Yeah,
Thomas Hanna called it sensory motor amnesia, and I don't think I've
exactly.
ever heard a better way of describing it. And so, we're all are in varying degrees of sensory motor amnesia for various reasons. Some of them can be good reasons, like we put on a shirt and it's scratchy, and we first put it on and we feel it's scratchy, but eventually our brain turns that off and it says, don't take that in as information anymore. It's not going to stop. It's irrelevant. So we can, phase things out of our ability to sense and feel from within. But we can learn to turn those on again. And that's very much about what I'm about across species, very much. And so,
Yes, that for me reminds me about what we started with, which is what informs the gaze. How do you see these things? And I think for me, what was really key in that is not just seeing movement, like watching a person or an animal move, but seeing it, that it's a relational thing, because when I'm working with movement, I'm working with a relational intelligence,
mhm.
and it makes sense that movement that choice to move in that way makes sense in this moment, and I can see that much more clearly when I see the movement in relationship, not just in isolated. I'm not just looking at the person or the animal, but I'm seeing it in context. That
Yeah.
helps me a lot. Yeah.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I've seen with horses, let's say that the horse's person, you could say guardian or steward or owner, however you want to say all the things, right? The horse's person. If that person gets like really attached to some kind of tool or technique they learned, like from a mentor or something, they learn it and they're like, oh, I'm getting really good at this, I want to practice it, and they do it over and over and over with their horse. And what they don't realize is that whatever they're doing on their end is causing some sort of response on the horse's end. And oftentimes that horse will end up with some sort of habituation in some major muscle groups where they've got a lot of extra tonicity or tightness and limitation because of this thing and the person is there, it's outside of their awareness. It's easy for me to see it when it's happening, but what is the skillful part is to be able to help the person integrate a different way of relating, so that can they continue to do that? Yes. Can they offer the horse some different options so that the horse isn't habituated anymore? Then they have the best of both worlds.
It's great, isn't it? Because it's reminding us something also about perception and how that works. It also reminds me of what you mentioned earlier, which was how when a trainer comes to a horse, you see how the horse is already responding maybe with expectation, or he's learned some way to be or what. And I think that's so interesting.
Yes, that relationship about what do you want from me? How would you like for me to do that? And then what I'm more interested
in. Will conform, right? The horse will conform to some extent. And
yeah. And we humans, when anyone who's ever started first grade, you've had your own experience of that, the indoctrination for all of everyone. So, but the part that can change, the part that can really change, is when a horse can, if you and I were talking about that word earlier about space. When a horse is being shown, they've got the opportunity to sense from within that it's not about how the movement is done, it's about feeling the movement. And that's different than performative. So,
right.
And that's the difference between a somatic experience, if you will. And there are many fields of somatics, but that's one of the main things for me with the horses, and with the humans. How does that feel? And then what happens after that? And are you still replicating it? Yeah.
I wonder, as you're saying that, it also reminds me, I wonder, I don't what your take is on how the horses experience this, but for us, we often, at least the way neuroscience talks about spatial perception and things, it's pretty dry, right? And space is an incredibly rich thing. I mean, if you look at the way indigenous people, many of them, they embed, almost everything is embedded in place. It's just incredible, but space is not just this literal thing I can measure between the distance between you and me. There's even words in Japanese, Samoan, and Maori that are for that space.
Yes.
It's a sacred thing. It has all kinds of things going on. But certainly one of the elements that can be present in space is symbolic. It's like if a person doesn't feel welcome, or if they feel welcome in the space, their posture will change. The chemicals will change in their brain, And I wonder about horses too, if they have this symbolic attachment to space.
Well, I think it's I love where you're going with this. It's so beautiful because it's something that I think has been lost in our culture. It's just been completely annihilated, really. But it doesn't mean it's not real, and it doesn't mean it can't be experienced, and it doesn't mean that it's not happening. It is. And so even when you talked about if you feel welcomed into a space, your posture changes. People who, some people, they're born being able to see someone's auric field, for example. Some people just have that ability. And so, and there, we have equipment they could measure that if you want to. So if you don't feel safe in a space, you'll draw your auric field in as well. So your whole energy body will shrink wrapped inward if you don't feel safe in an environment. If you do feel welcome and, oh, here's my buddies, and it just opens right back up again. And absolutely, horses, have their ways of responding. There was a horse at the end of a barn. I was with a friend of mine. We were standing at this far end, and there's a stallion at the end, and there were lots of warning signs around this stallion's stall. That he could be very aggressive, to stay back, stay aware. It's dangerous situation with this stallion, right? And so this horse would exhibit that. You would see it. But then this little boy who's like 6 or 7 at the far end of the barn comes walking down the aisle, and my friend says, well, look at the stallion. The stallion sees the little boy, lowers his head, his eye, he starts to look like a puppy dog. He just melted in this little boy's presence. And so you can't unsee these things when you see them,
Yeah.
Now, am I the person that would say, oh, put the kid in the stall with the horse? No, I'm not. I'm not. But what did I see happen? I saw it in real time. And so a lot of this can be very much about, what are we anticipating, and what is occurring in the space between the
Exactly. And it reminds me so much about when you just said about what's real, that we tend to, what's very common is we have this very literal interpretation of what's real. Mm-hmm. And yet the imaginary is such a big part of perception, like many things.
Yes.
what we actually perceive, because perception, we receive information, we take it apart, we put it all back together. And even before we've received that, it's a feed forward system. So what we expect to see, what we've learned, what we believe, all of this story, all of this stuff is already pre-laid on that. It's already colored. So not only that, perception itself is a coloring. And so it helps if we take responsibility for both those things. Yeah. The fact that what is real is what we're creating in our imagination. And the best chance I have is to receive input constantly from you, from the world around me. Then I'm getting enough information to constantly update. Yeah. As soon as I have a fixed image, oh, I know, Gloria, it's over. It's like
she's this way. Yeah.
Yes, I'm no longer updating. Yeah. And I'm sure animals, really, that they would confirm that if I'm there just in the moment and there's enough communication going on. But for me, it's also, it's like coming back to what I was saying in nature, because in that respect, it means it's like we're in a waking dream. We are constantly meeting ourselves and not understanding how much we can just get in the way, actually, of things happening and relationship happening. But how to deal with that, and it's either being with clear people who can help us, support us, or being in nature, because nature has no question, has no hang-ups, it has no psychological issues, it has no story. Well, that's not true. Of course, nature can be very damaged and traumatized and things like that. But yeah.
I get where you're going with this, though. It's when you said that, it reminded me of an experience I had in the southern Arizona desert. It was a time of year where I could go and sit on this certain rock, and because that sun is so intense. But it was a time of year that you could do that. And there was a certain mantra that I was learning, and I wanted to just be with that mantra and practice it and integrate it and learn it. So I went to my favorite rock in this part of the desert, and I'm sitting out there on this rock. And as I'm practicing, this cutest little lizard you've ever seen keeps like coming close, and he keeps sitting close and closer and closer. And it just went on and on. It was so beautiful. And it felt so special to have his presence there with me. And I thought, wow, he must really like mantra, because he just was so with me the whole time. And so,
that's so interesting you say it, because
I realized,
I think it's one of the beauties of working with different animals too, how to tune in to that level, and we have a reptile brain.
Yes, we do. And I realize people would say, oh, you're anthropomorphizing. I don't care. It was my experience with my lizard in my desert.
Look, It's we sometimes even with science, we kind of put the hierarchy and we look down. Oh, it's just instinctual and blah
Yeah.
blah. Oh, like
Yeah.
the gut brain, right? Which science calls the second brain, which is a real impudence because it existed far before this one.
That's
And
right.
this can learn a
It
lot
still
by
shows the
learning to listen.
proclivity in the
Yes,
scientific community to the
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, you know, so it's I think it's a very important statement for what's behind what you just said. For me is that reptile brain. It's again what we were just briefly touched on earlier. It's a it's a support. It's the reptile brain in evolutionary terms, and don't quote me on the science here because I'm really bad on details, but in evolutionary terms existed before the limbic system, so before a lot of emotional stuff,
Yeah.
right? For mammals. So that's a very important thing because what it means is that uh, that reptile brain, if there's a snake, a snake, and it sees a little mouse, it will strike without hesitation. So there's basically the snake's indirect experiencing, and if it would hesitate, it would start thinking, oh, look at that little mouse. It's so sweet. And it's gone. It doesn't hesitate. It doesn't grip on its thoughts. It doesn't grip on its sensations. It doesn't grip on its emotion. So that reptile brain is supporting us direct experiencing without hesitating, without over attaching or identifying with what it is we're experiencing. And that is an expression of core too. It's an expression of my presence in each moment in this place. And
Yeah. Yeah.
and and so and it's remarkable how much we underplay the value of it and how much we've misunderstood it and how little we seem to understand how to switch it back on, how to switch on all that more basic support, which is just as important.
It
If
is just as
something,
important. Yeah. Yeah.
one of the biggest lessons that our coming into the world as babies and growing teaches us is integration, or is like we step by step we integrate more and more complex ways of being, but it's supported by everything that comes before.
Yes.
And if that all falls away, or if it's never really been established, we rely much too much on the most recent bit, which is what tends to happen. We over-identify then with this element of the mind. So, I think it's a really important thing that you're saying and maybe one of the things that being with animals a lot can call back, how it's like how you relate to a baby. If you just relate to a baby from an adult level, it's not going to be so much. But if you come down to the baby's level, can appreciate like what makes sense for the baby, there's more communication.
When you and I were talking earlier about language and what you just said with the babies, it makes me think about when people when they see a baby and they're going to baby talk, coo to the baby, they'll do it in their mother language, even if they've been
Wow.
like, say if Spanish was their mother language and they've been speaking English for 50 years, when they see a baby, they'll go back to their mother language. And like you and I were talking about what we hear when we're in the womb, and then
Right.
it's all connected. But it's funny when I think about this lizard, this experience of this particular lizard, when he came close, normally lizards, if they see you, they kind of go away, right? They're not going to necessarily come close, but he got on this one rock and then he got closer and closer and closer. And then he got directly in front of me, like for
And didn't feel
hours.
threatened at any point.
And so that's what I was thinking about, how the scientists might have this proclivity to say, oh, you're anthropomorphizing. They didn't see his face. I did. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't even care what they think about it. So then the
Yeah.
lizard comes and he gets beside me on the rock.
Wow. Wow.
And so it was a lived experience. And so for all of
Yeah.
us, having our lived experiences to me are so much more valuable because, and that I always encourage people, as far as like if something is tender to them, don't share it with just anyone, because why would you? Like, you wouldn't give your newborn baby to a stranger. That's your experience. And if you can't
Yes.
hold it, don't
Exactly.
give it away to someone who will,
Yeah. Yeah. That's primary. For me, it's like in any relationship.
Mhm.
And certainly in like one of the most fundamental things about being a teacher, my job has to be to see this person, you know, to be seen, to see and to be seen. It's just, if that's not happening, what's going on? If there's all kinds of other stuff going, if we just forget that basic need we all have. And of course, for many of us in the beginning, yeah, it makes sense to choose situations where there's more chance for that, you know, to be more vulnerable or to be more exposed or whatever. But it is, uh, what else comes up for me is that it's a two-way thing, you know, it's never just one way. I have to see myself if I'm going to stand a chance to see you, you know, I can't just see you. And it's why I think one of the reasons why I found teaching always so challenging, because it's a two-way portal. And if I can't deal with my limitations or can't understand that how vital relationship is for us on so many levels, you know, I think with so much of our conditioning, we've been given the message it's about I, me, my, make, you know, who am I, individuating beings. Okay, but without that relational aspect, you know, the human being, I don't know, more and more my work brings me to this sense that the human being cannot know what it is unless it's in community, unless it's in relationship.
Exactly.
And we can be very far from that. And that's maybe, it's like, what I find important is trying to, not trying, it's just like, can I be in the space where I can begin to understand how to respond to what's going on, not just in my own personal life, but in bigger ways. You know, I moved to Greece from Holland a little while after the financial crisis,
Mhm.
and I was shocked by just seeing how many people seemed to be frozen from that and not getting to, okay, how do I respond? How do I respond personally? And the same with the health crisis with COVID, you know, what do I do? Not not getting lost in so much of the other stuff, but you know, making sense on that level. I think it serves us. It's so important for us that we can find a way to come back to that, to listening, to evoking all that intelligence that is there, you know.
Absolutely. And that's what you're describing to me, that the thing around when I mentioned about the itchy shirt, and if you have that itchy shirt and you stop feeling it anymore, the stress or the fear response, when that's been habituated over and over, the one of the best ways to come out of that is through a somatic practice. And so,
Right.
and I know, yoga originally was meant to be a healing art, and oftentimes the way it's taught, it it's it can be quite the opposite if people aren't taught how to be able to integrate from a place that's really right for their own bodies.
Yeah.
So,
And the
just
timing too, listening, respecting the timing of your own process.
yes, yes, for sure, and just like how we integrate and how we, you know, take that practice, and um, so but those kinds of things, they're meant to be healing arts, and so to help people come out, all of us come out of a freeze response. But just the events that you mentioned would put people into what Thomas Hanna called sensory motor amnesia to varying degrees because of the way our nervous systems are wired. So anything you can do to move and feel and move those, just at its subtle thing across all these different boxes of disciplines and schools of study and names and terminologies that we give in things. People are like, it's like, well, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. It
Yeah,
depends
exactly.
on who you find and how they, your teacher, how is your teacher, that kind of thing. So, but that's one of the things I would say to anybody who's listening is find ways to move and feel and move in subtle ways and ways that
Yeah.
are pleasurable. And this can be like, the level of work can be incredibly precise. And so, and that's a blessing. Like that is a powerful thing, that this work can be really, really precise. And, we're living, breathing beings, and finding ways to do that.
Yes, exactly. And the other thing that comes up for me when you say that is, for many, many years now, I've kind of looking for the simple, without losing the complex.
Yeah.
Like, what is it that will, what is a simple understanding that will hold all that complexity, you know? And for me, when you were talking just now, what comes up there really is that, more often than not, when we struggle with those kind of processes, or finding the way, or that at the root of so much is self-love. Like that, why do so many of us struggle with being loyal to ourselves, with being on this path of consequently taking care in a deep way, because then it sustains, and it's a consequent process, and there's no question. There's no question about, it's very evident what we have to do. And for me, it's not forgetting the emotion, because the emotion, some issues can be pre-verbal. It's before the words, before all these stories, there's something. And how we learn to love ourselves again. It's like I think that for me has been, the most powerful and the most important. That all of the other details and all of the other things that we may or may not do can serve that on different levels in different ways. But that finally I'm attending to this question. Because if I put that off, it can seem really hard work. Or how is this not working? I understand this thing, I know this thing, but I can't get to it. I keep doing that other thing again, or whatever it is. It's not, there's not a consequence that sustains to that realization. And my feeling is that part of it can be that acknowledgement that finally I have to acknowledge that maybe I don't really believe I'm lovable, or whatever it is around that script, that's not to be scared to address that, because if we start addressing that, there's no negatives. Do you know what I mean? There's no way to give more space to love yourself. How can that ever be a bad thing?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's interesting that you said that about self-love, because that's what I was thinking. It really comes down to love, so to love and be loved. It really comes down to that. And the self-care part, like you said, self-love is, they've done studies and they know that people who, like, say if they were going to do a somatic practice, but then they wouldn't actually do it, the women in the studies,
Right.
it was because of, they would be a caregiver for someone else. They would take care of someone else, but they wouldn't do their own self-care practices. And it was related to trauma. So,
Okay. Right.
um, so
Yes, it's important. Yeah. Yeah. And for me, what helps in that, something, I don't know if we mentioned it in this part, but it is coming back to a simple question, which is where. Like, where am I? Not necessarily in a literal sense, although where I am, how I relate, I will relate in an embodied way to this place is a part of that. But where am I in terms of my experiencing? Because we have a huge landscape of experiencing possible as human beings, so that it helps me understand, when I'm in a place where I'm being critical about myself, or when I'm in a space that, oh, I should be loving myself, or whatever it is, it's just telling me, yeah, this is just an expression of the place that you're identified at the moment. And start to pay attention to that, because then we just have to find healthier places to be. It reminds me a little bit of something I've heard you say, but in a different way, and something to do with what you were just saying as well, to do with nourishing ourselves, nurturing ourselves, and in the beginning, with people we know who will support us in that and
yeah,
see us in that. because I think that's part of what we miss from community. A lot of us enter this journey either just with a therapist or on our own, and it's so good. It's like it's been a key question for me for more than 35 years, and that I keep putting out to teachers and to students. Do you have the support? Do you have the support? What is the support? And start to tackle that. Start to consequently keep at that question. What do I need to support me? Because it's just seems so often left out.
I
And
agree.
then we wonder why we fail, or we wonder why we don't make it, or
I was just talking with a client about this very thing about the power of community, the power of the proclivity, the proximity, not proclivity, but proximity. I have a the proximity of being, like, say, if you have certain things that you do as a practice, and then how that's supported by the community, how it just makes it so much easier. It's like, it's just, you don't even have to think about it. It's just what you do, and
exactly.
how supportive it is for your nervous system, and how we don't have that anymore
Yes.
normally.
And yet you say it, right? And I think it's so important that you say it, because the next issue is that, yeah, we don't have it. So what do you do? And I think that that's very important. If you can, you start going out looking for it, you start creating it, you start talking to people who you can also find that same call. And
Yeah.
something that really helped me not so long ago was, because many of us get in touch with what we need, and we have this ideal or a fantasy, but then get stuck in not being able to manifest because it doesn't seem to exist out there. The partner or the friend or the community or the world was one thing that really helped me, was to find some way to manifest, not just to be stuck with this fantasy. And I just
Yes.
wrote everything down. Okay, what would all those things be in that community? What would all these things be in this person? What would all these things be in this friend, in this lover, in this world? And it really it helped, because I think we need to find ways to work with the imagination, with fantasy, and not just, because sometimes it can really be an expression of an unfulfilled need, and we have to know how to understand that, how to deal with that, how to read it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I love that as a practice too. And there's a book for those listening. Written by Shakti Gawain, called
Oh yeah,
Creative Visualization. So people
right.
might enjoy that, just
Yeah.
along with what you're talking about. But um, I love that as a practice. But I find I don't want to say everyone's nervous system, because it's not true that it's everyone's nervous system. But I think one of the things that's happening is that people's nervous systems are in a state that they may want to manifest something, but then depending where they are in their autonomic ladder, they can't handle certain aspects of it. So their nervous system, their protective forces will shut them down. So they can have it, they would want it, but they can't when it comes to it. If they've got associated pain with it, or that wasn't safe before, then they'll do things to close that door and shut that down. So I think one of the things is for everybody to do their own work on their nervous system and be with people who are doing the same kind of work, because it can be really helpful, to heal. So
Yes, yes, and seeking out tools and things that will support that, because it
mhm.
is, we can have deeply ingrained habits in the nervous system, right? And you were talking about this with horses too, patterns of behavior, of movement, and choices about how we respond to things happening in the world, strategies even.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and it's like I was saying earlier, sometimes it's not always the easiest to tackle that on the same level, like with the mind, to find other ways to support. So, for example, one of the things um, in body mind centering, when we're looking at issues in the nervous system, because, okay, we talk of the nervous system classically as being an information carrier.
mhm,
Yeah, but before the nervous system existed in evolutionary terms, the fluids were what carried information, and they still do.
And they still do, yeah.
They still do. So bringing the support of the fluids up to support the nervous system, not having to think it has to control everything, and
Yes. Yeah.
can be so useful. And the same thing with the organs, bringing this, like the parasympathetic, if we're talking about the nervous system, finding this more steadiness, and because it's incredible how much our modern lifestyle can encourage us to be embodied just in certain aspects of our being, and how then we can neglect this rich other ways of being that can support us not getting things so stuck, because again, yeah, there are techniques and things to deal with habits of the nervous system, but what supports us with that can come from outside. And yeah, so I'd also encourage people to look for the ways to if you're struggling with your movement, then yeah, maybe you like dancing, and then that's a way to encourage something. So working with what works
Mhm.
also, and but again, looking for the support in as many different ways as possible, and
Yeah,
being creative with that, because I think the creativity, um, the helping professions doesn't always encourage us to do that. It gives us solutions to fix problems, and it doesn't necessarily honor our own creative ability to have a much broader perspective.
I
You know,
agree. And we're none of it separate. And I think that's one of the things that happens in certain fields. That, the modern, educational system is so it segments everything. And the truth is nothing is separate. And so there is a book too called Creative Visualization by Julia Cameron. And she not creative, sorry about that. The Artist Way. So Shakti Gawain, creative, yeah, visualization, the Artist Way, Julia Cameron, and she uses basically that whole book is about how to connect with your creative side as a way of healing, really. I mean, just to bring yourself back into purpose. And so I think that's one of the things, like if we're not connected to any kind of purpose at all, we don't have that love of life if we're disconnected. And everybody
exactly,
at times can
exactly.
feel very disconnected. It can feel really disheartening, when you're feeling that level of disconnection.
Yes,
So
that
that's another
that's it's
creativity.
so important you say that, because it also, to me, it speaks about affirming life and finding the ways to do that.
Yeah.
And uh and so, because when we give our power away, to it's like, uh we are very conditioned, to many of us, to the authority of our experience is in the expert. Used to be the priest, became the doctor, sometimes it's even the yoga teacher.
Yep.
But it takes us away then from giving space to allowing our own, not only our own knowing
Agency.
to come up, but also to how we connect back to celebrating life or experiencing life and affirming that. Because the emphasis is always then on what's in the way, the problem, the issue. And for some of us, that's even what validates us,
Yeah.
which is a real trap, but very common.
Yeah.
So if nothing else, it comes back to this where question: am I really giving more space to my problems than I am to life? You
Hmm.
know, because
Oh,
life, we have it seems to be, we have a strange way, many of us, to come into life. If we're not lucky to be born into a perfect situation, we just have a lot the story, and that's our way. It's a stepping stone. It's like how we figure out how to use that, not to just be the story and identified in it, but to say, is that life?
yeah,
Usually not if we're just repeating it. So there's a funny kind of irony or paradox to the whole thing.
there
But
is.
certainly it's like how you affirm life. And I imagine working with animals is a great way to do that too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it is incredibly rewarding. Like it's on a level that it's visceral. I can think of it and I feel it, and visceral, very visceral level. But for people who are listening, when you talk about the where of where am I, when you ask yourself that question, and you can let me know if you feel like this is on track with what you're wanting to convey, because I want people to have a taste of that and to be able to get that for themselves. So if I use the words, where am I putting my attention? or my focus or my energy. Is that, and how else could you say to someone about when you ask that question, where am I? Does this,
This is it's probably the richest, most profound question you can ask. And so there are 1,000 ways to answer it. And if you're in that question, it's a good place to be, right? Because it could be something simple like what we were talking about earlier. Am I more inside or more out or both? Not that there's right or wrong ever. It's just it, and it's never that. It's never that it's about good or bad. It's just simply giving me a clue about where I am, so I can ask the question: is this where I need to be? Is this serving me, or do I need to go back? Because we very often misread the signs.
oh
It's
yeah,
like we maybe have a habit that, okay, I go that way, but actually the sign's saying don't go that way. But
for
that's
sure.
the habit, so we go down that track.
That's
So
exactly.
it's the one of the first things that question does is it usually questions, well, am I just totally identified with what's going on? Do I believe I am my emotions? Do I believe I am my mind? Do I believe I am my body? Because that's often one of the first things we need to be reminded about. That just seems to happen to us. We get confused, we lose our way, we over-identify again. It's not a problem as long as I can just sometimes reflect, oh, okay, there I go again. What I'm feeling, it feels so real. And sometimes it is. Sometimes it's about what's happening right now. And sometimes it's just the old story playing itself again. And we need to learn the difference, you know. So the where question is a lifelong question, and it becomes richer and richer and more relevant. And there are so many ways you can reference that question. Again, a simple one is inside, outside, both.
Yes.
And that another one is just um, certainly about place. How much am I really embodied in this place, relating to gravity, relating to the space around me, or am I in a more exclusive focal state, which is how our technology, how our society conditions us? It's a habit of perception. So we need to be reminded. And the other where is more on a less literal level, and just like I was saying earlier, more in terms of where's my mind? Is my mind just in my head? Is it just in my thoughts? Is it just in my feelings? Is it just, where's my I wouldn't just say attention. I'd say it's more, yeah, because that's where my attention might be focused. But there's other ways of being. There's more
There
less
are.
exclusive
So
ways.
give
So
people a
is the word
start.
exclusive? Is it inclusive? For example, there's
uh,
there's there's 1,000 ways we can talk about this, and they're
so
all beautiful.
to give people a start who, if they haven't had any forms of physical practices where they're, mindful, not mindful practices, but you could say it that way in a way, because mindful sounds so silly to say about a physical embodiment because it's quite the opposite. So these
Yeah,
terminologies
exactly.
that we have are so limited, and they're
Confusing.
not
Yeah.
really speaking to what it is that we're speaking to here. But you could say, could someone say, where is my awareness, to give them a start?
Yeah.
And I would love to add that any of the practices where you're moving and feeling, and you're feeling and moving, and that is going to start that process of being able to say, where am I? But the literal person, maybe they're a banker and they've not done the kinds of studies that you've done or I've done, or the
Yeah.
practices, the dedication of decades, right? They don't have that experience. They're
Yes.
tallying the things and they're working in the bank. And so to give them the opportunity to ask themselves, where's my awareness right now? And could they even put their awareness, where is it? And can they put it somewhere else even? Like, for example, can you put your awareness in the sole of your foot? Or can you put your awareness in your knee?
Yeah.
Or, just
Sure.
somewhere for them to start that's more embodied. Because if you ask them that question, they're going to say, well, I'm in Phoenix, or I'm in,
Yeah.
they're
That's okay. It's okay.
yeah,
You can start. It's always, I think, easier to start where you are.
yeah.
So
I am in
I would
Phoenix.
I would start a journal labeled where, and just begin with that. And you start the question, and you start to expand the question. And if you begin in a bank, after a while, you start asking, where am I in relationship to the poetic world?
Mhm.
You start opening up the question, and I think that it's one that is, because we start to, ultimately it's a context question. It's asking us, what is your context? Is it inclusive or exclusive? Like, we start to appreciate the nature, and this can tell us a great deal, like the quality of presence, all kinds of things. So I would say start in a way that makes sense for you, and ask a different where question every day. Be creative, because there's so much to discover, and it's like orientation. How do I know where I am? If it's Phoenix is my only answer to the question, it's probably the poorest. It's useful on some level sometimes to know that, but ask a horse where it knows where it is, and it won't tell you Phoenix. It will give you very relevant answers, right? And you can see it in the way it moves. You can see it's an intelligence operating moment by moment.
Yes.
That's the big important where.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if people wanted to contact you or know more about you, and I know we didn't talk about this, but how would they find you or connect with you?
I'm very little these days on that platform, but you can find me on social media, like on Facebook. I have some pages on Facebook, and you can certainly get in contact with me there. That's probably, or I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram, but I never go there. But I'm even on Twitter, but I think I've only once seen Twitter. So in those days when I was told you should do all this stuff for business, I did all those things. But so Facebook's probably the easiest. Leo Peppas. I think it's Leo.Peppas is my Facebook business page.
Will you spell your last name for them so they have it? Leo.Peppas.
P-E-P-P-A-S.
P-E-P-P-A-S.
If you search me, that name, you'll find me for sure, because there was a time when I was much more active. These days, I'm more in nature than I am on the web. So yeah, this is a rare occurrence.
Yes, I know. I'm so glad we did this today, though.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. And I hope the people listening will enjoy it and take something from it that really serves you and serves your loved ones. And this is my way of like bringing community together of people who want to know more and who love animals and who, love nature and in embodiment practices and all of those things. So, and just the kindness, that's one of the things I feel like the broader our movement palette is, and the more we have those neuronal connections and this kind of work, it is a level where you can have compassion and empathy that, that you may not have been able to access before, because you have the movement palette for it. And at least that's my, that we all can feel, you wouldn't bully someone because you wouldn't want to be bullied, right? Or this kind of thing. So,
yes, exactly. And if you have questions, because I think this conversation can bring up so many questions, that's great, and I'm happy to entertain questions. And I think it's also can be so useful just to sit with it for a while, because so often questions come up when we're like dreams, we're almost ready to answer them for ourselves. We just need to give a little bit of space, let them sit around, and give the space to appreciate things in a different way sometimes, or just to be curious, and
curiosity.
It's been great.
It is, yes, yeah. So, but I was like, well, if someone really wants to know more about kind of what you're about, and some of us, we are more like we are in nature more. We're not on technology as much, and so, but if you wanted to have any sort of further conversation or connection, if you wanted to do that, so just in case, but yeah. So for everybody listening, I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you've really felt fulfilled in some way that you might not have otherwise. So, and I know I do from talking with you about these things that feel like are important for all of us. So,
yeah, thanks for sharing your time.
Thank you, Leo.
Talk again.
We'll stop the recording for now. Thanks. Bye, everybody.